It is a little bit hard to see, but I am starting to work on the panel that will stabilize the bottom of the quarter panel and also create a closure. As with everything else, I usually start with a paper pattern. This gives me an idea, so I can visualize it and get an idea of what direction I'm going to be taking with this. This is kind of a complicated. This is a simple area right here, but out in front, where the wheel tub starts down at the lower part, this is going to be a little more complex. I have some ups, downs, angles, in, outs, and so forth to try and reconcile. It's always nice to just go with a straight line, but sometimes it's not always possible, given what you're working with here as far as the stock Challenger's configuration here, trying to reconcile it with this quarter panel. But this is where I'm going to start with it, and go on from here. A lot of you are probably familiar with this. Is a bead roller, and what it is a machine that is used to put impressions in sheet metal. You can see right here they've taken a very shallow step die. In other words, there's a little ridge here and there's a little ridge here, and you roll the sheet metal through, and you can see I've made a little impression that stiffens the panel up. There's a bunch of different profiles you could either make or buy to put designs or strengthen the panel up, like I've done here. I'm using 028 here for this panel that's going to go behind the bottom of the quarter panel, because it's not necessary to go with the thicker 050 back there. This will be fine. This will do the job. It's just mostly to keep debris out from behind the quarter panel at the bottom, and also to stabilize it. So the bottom of the quarter panel has a slight curve to it. Now I'm going to be folding these edges up to have something to, in this case, rivet to, and then all these other flanges, something to weld to. So what I'll do with this now is I'll use the same set of dies, and they're just put down tight, and I'll stay away from this little groove here. I'll just put this to the outside. This is about a 5/8. This is about a 5/8 groove here, a cut in this lower wheel, and this is about a 1/2 inch flange. So I'll just be using this as a flat die to tip this up and get this started, so that it'll be a flange. This enables me to go around a curve and make a break. I don't know if you could see what I've done here, but it started to lift it up as I'm just gently raising it as I'm running it along the line. And I'll go through several more times until I have a 90-degree here. And what that'll end up doing, though, is you'll see it starts to curve the metal a little bit, and then I'll go to my shrinker stretcher over there, and I'll shrink this edge up and straighten the panel back out. And here's the finished panel with all the flanges bent up. And there's probably a little bit of trimming I have to do here and there to get it fit up into the car, but you can see how, like I said, there's a slight curve in the bottom. Follow the bottom of the quarter panel, and now it's 90 degrees. Here's that panel clecoed into position up underneath the quarter panel in the back, just temporarily in there until I get everything else fitted up. Well, I've got this vertical panel in, and I've kind of squared up this area here. So now I've got this lip. This is attached just with clecos to the bottom here. I've got this lip, and I have to make a return lip for this quarter panel to weld to. So I've created this piece. This is my first step. I'll just cleco this in. I've already done the shrinking and stretching, and so I'll just, let's see, get this cleco in here. Now, eventually this is going to be spot welded, plug welded, rosetted, whatever you want to call it, to this inner piece. The inner piece will stay with the car when the quarter comes off. So I've got this return lip established now, and it's running wild here. And then I'm going to bring a panel over to this piece, and then I'll put these two pieces together permanently, and then fit it all back in here. And eventually it'll weld to this flange over here, and again, it'll stay with the car. And I've got to work my way around the entire wheel tub in this fashion, creating this inner lip right here for this to weld to. Here's that inner piece that was on the inside of the wheel opening, and this is the flange that I bent up after I marked it out, so that other panel will fit in against this. I'll be able to weld it to this. Later on, when I've got the quarter panel off, I'll be able to reach in and dolly this down a little bit. But I wanted to show you just a homemade set of these flanging pliers. Now I've got this one here cut out a little deeper. Originally, you can see it was just meant to do a 1/4-inch flange, which is it's just a pair of old pliers, and they're ground down, excuse me, on the edge here, so that you get a sharp edge right here. And then ideally, if you have it set to the depth that you want, you just run up against the stop and just work your way down the panel. If you want to put a 1/4-inch flange, 1/2-inch flange, you can make it up for whatever you want. And you just kind of sneak up it, bend it just a little bit at a time. And that's for little panels that's kind of tight that you can't put in the bead roller and get a nice neat edge like I did this edge over here. Obviously, since this is a little, it would narrow up, you couldn't roll it over in the bead roller. So like I said, once I get the quarter panel back off, I'll be able to dolly this down just a little bit better, clean it up a little bit. You really won't see much of this. This will be on the inside of the wheel well. Here are the two pieces assembled and ready to go into the car. They'll still be just in temporarily till I get all the other assemblies around the wheel hole done. That way I'll make sure if anything has to be maneuvered or shifted around, I'm not committed. So there you have it. Finally, there's the assembly put back into the car. Like I said, I'll have to leave it in there just with Clecos as I work my way around to make sure that everything stays put. Things have a tendency to shift around. Alright, so this was a little bit hard to describe, not only because it's hard to describe it, because I wasn't sure how I was going to do it myself. What I had talked about doing before was putting a return flange so that this will look like the 71 Roadrunner glass, but keeping the Challenger glass. So before I put I had to take the quarter panel back off, but before I put it back on, I decided to put this return flange on. It's welded to the body. It's also primered and painted on the inside. And later, since I just tacked this, I didn't want to put a lot of heat in this because it's close to the glass. It's about a 1/2 inch away from the glass bed. I just tacked it every 1 inch with the welder, and I'll go back in and I'll seal it up with some epoxy on the back side over here, and then I'll prime over the whole mess. But this has a little return lip here that'll accept the transition piece that comes in from the quarter panel and makes the closure. Now, like I said before, there's a 1/2 inch, well, it's not actually, it's about 3/8 of an inch behind there, which will allow this glass to be taken out in the future if it need be. But I'll have to come up with a molding. This is just a piece of wood here, but I'll have to come up with a molding that'll be able to be glued to the glass and then close up that gap around there that matches the molding that came off of this glass that runs into the top of the door over here, and at the top of the window, and then top of the door over here. So I'll have to make that out of plastic, or I'll have to mold it out of some resin or something like that. But I'll come up with something that looks like that molding that'll just simply glue to this glass and close up the gap, hopefully keeping the water out of that area of the car. And then this will also be there's a small flange left here to weld the quarter panel transition piece in here. All right, time for a little history lesson as far as stock car fabrication is concerned. This is an English wheel. Some of you are probably familiar with it. Anybody who's done any metal shaping might have come across this somewhere in their travels. Originally, it was called a smoothing wheel. You would beat the shapes out with a hammer into a sandbag or a shot bag, and then, or into a tree stump, whatever, and then you would run it through this wheel, and it would average out the metal and smooth it up. So there are some people who, over the years, have developed skills to actually just start from a flat piece of sheet metal and use this machine to go about shaping their metal completely. Back in the 1980s, a fellow by the name of Cal Davis came up to North Carolina from Florida, where he'd lived most of his life. He was in his mid-50s at the time and went to work for Curb Motorsports, and saw how they were shaping their fenders on the stock cars, which was very crude. They were just taking panels and they were cutting pie shapes into them and then welding them up, and then taking lots and lots and lots of Bondo, maybe an inch and a quarter of Bondo, and shaping the fenders that way. And of course, that's a lot of weight, and he saw a better way and decided to introduce this whole tool to the stock car fabrication situation, and it's been a mainstay, well, up until the last few years, where a lot of the pieces and parts are stamped out, so there's almost no need for this tool any longer, which is a shame. There's a bunch of them out there floating around cheap. If you want to buy them, usually you can pick them up for pretty cheap. These went for about $2,500 brand new. Real, what they call a real English wheel, in other words, something much more massive than this, used to go around $10,000 and up. And Cal got a set of plans by a guy by the name of John Glover, who worked for General Motors, shaping metal in their prototyping division. And that set of plans is what he used to make this wheel, and was able to bring it in at a price that a lot of teams could afford to buy in. He went on to sell these things for the next 25 years. He's currently out of business producing things, but you can get these from a lot of different sources. Which brings me to my next item. As I told you before, I took the quarter panel and hoisted it up and ran it through here to try and smooth out some of the irregularities from some of my patchwork and my hammer work. And that was, it's a two-man job if you're going to use one of these, obviously, if you got a big panel like the quarter panel. So here's another item that some of the stock car guys developed over the years. They call this a Bill wheel. I guess this Bill's the guy who did this first. I don't know who Bill is, but all it basically is a way to something to capture two of the anvils, a flat anvil and then one with a little curve to it. And it's got a pivot point, and then on this end over here, we just use this, like, I forget what to call this, but anyway, usually there's a heim joint in here and a more solid handle. This is the first thing that's wrong with this one that I made is I just grabbed whatever I had. These should be more substantial. They should be at least an inch and a quarter to an inch and a half, and they should be about a 0.90 wall. And this plate should be larger to keep this from moving side to side way out here. And usually with the heim joints and a machined handle over here with knurling, this is very solid here, and it doesn't want to twist, and allow these arms to move side to side. Also with these, this is just like an 0.45 wall or 0.49 wall, and the problem with that is it's flexible. So when you pinch it down, you could still spread it out a little bit. You can see that. So it reduces the amount of force that you're able to apply to the panel if you're trying to smooth something out or get out a large depression in the panel. So it's basically a handheld version of this. Since I had the quarter panel off the car, and there's lots of little spots that had hammer dings from where I beat it out, and had lots of low spots where I put the patch in, high, low, high, and then in these areas here where it was kind of wanting to be like a butt cheek here, coming into these two different shapes. You basically unwind it, put it in, then tighten it back up, bring the two wheels together, and then you can roll it over in a zigzag pattern through the area that you want, and it'll average out a lot of the irregularities in the panel. So just thought I'd show you that, because just one more tool in the toolkit. Like I said, I already had the English wheel, so I have the anvils. These anvils can be bought separately. A place called Irvin Smith sells these anvils, so they come in different radiuses if you wanted to buy them individually, and it's about a 1/2 inch shaft here, so you can use just a 1/2 inch bolt to make this piece up. It's 2 cradles. Of course, there's a long arm, and like I said, this should be more substantial. This worked for what I needed it to work for, but if I'm going to use it for anything more serious, I'm going to have to beef this up a little bit. It's a pivot point. It's about 2/3 of the way down. Then in this area here, there's a double shear bracket, and obviously the ideal thing would have hind joints here with a reverse thread here and a handle that's milled, that's tapped with both a positive and then a negative thread, so you can use this handle to open these up or close them down and put more pressure on once you get it on the panel. And you can usually hold on to it from the top here and then guide it across the panel, and it'll smooth out a lot of sins. And I can use all the help I can get with some of this stuff. I'm not the premier metal worker. I know guys that can do that with a hammer and dolly and just sit there for hours and tippy tap that stuff out. But this is a real help to me. I've already done as much smoothing as I want to on this panel for now, but I just thought I'd show you what this thing looks like as far as trying to operate it. I've got the round dolly on the bottom, the flatter one on the top, and I'm cranking it down now, putting pressure. Actually, it's opening up this end over here, and then it's closing down that end there. As you see, you run across it in a zigzag pattern, smoothing out any irregularities, highs and lows. See, I've got a pretty big transition there that I'm going to have to work a little bit with hammer and dolly somewhere. From here, tick-tack across that, and go back in an opposite direction. Be careful not to work it in the same direction. You're going to be careful with this thing when you undo it so you don't leverage it and put a crease in your panel. And I'm opening up the jaws again and pulling it out. Well, the quarter panel's back on the car, and I'm trying to finish developing this pattern to close up and make the connection between the quarter panel and the body, or the inner body of the car around the window. As you can see, it changes the appearance of the window, but actually the window goes way back in there, and there's a gap. If this ever needs to be removed, you will remove a molding that I have to make up to go around here, and then you'll be able to pop the window out from the inside as you normally would. As you can see, I'm developing this paper pattern to try and give me something to cut the metal with, but I've added this return lip, and once the metal is welded to here, it'll be rosette welded, or I'll drill out holes so that I can weld it to this inner flange here, which is away from the window, and then down through here. So this was a bit of a hassle to make this little transition, and this will all have to be sealed up with silicone or something like that right in this little crock here before I put the molding over. But that's where I am with this. I'm going to have to continue on with my project down here, finishing out my wheel tub, and that should be one of the last projects before I actually start thinking about permanently welding this to the car. And then I get to start all over again on this side. And yeah, it's a problem with working on cars. There's two sides. Anyways, that's where I'm at now.